This is a production of O'Brien Communications.
Hi, I'm Tim O'Brien, and this is the Shaping Opinion podcast. Our guest today is Aaron Bandler. He's an investigative journalist. He's based in the Bay Area of California, and he's written for several leading national news organizations. In today's interview, we'll talk with Aaron about something he's investigated and he's reported on after noticing a disturbing trend at the ubiquitous website, Wikipedia. Hi, Aaron. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me on.
Hey, it's good to see you, and it's good to hear from you. Sorry about the technical glitches before we got started today, but we're finally here. And I wanted to ask you, I'm obviously not a computer expert, but I know you're an expert in something called investigative reporting. And I've dealt with investigative reporters over the years, and when I started my career, I wanted to be an investigative reporter. And I'm always fascinated by what causes someone to want to not just be a journalist, but somebody that really digs into a topic and might spend months to years on that specific topic, sometimes before the article or before the subject even comes to light. So you never know if an article or a topic is going to make it into print or on air until after you've done all the work. So what made you want to be an investigative journalist?
So I initially wanted to be a sports journalist at a young age because I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area originally. And growing up, my sports teams weren't particularly good. And so I was in my writing assignments in middle school, basically venting about them, and saying like, oh, we should boycott the teams until they make some changes or whatever. So for a while in my life, when I was younger, I wanted to be a sports journalist because what could be more fun than following your favorite team and covering them? That changed at high school. I joined my high school's newspaper and did a little bit of sports reporting there. But what happened was during the election, I was sophomore in high school during the 2008 election, and on campus everyone was for Obama, but I was for McCain at the time, and mainly part of it was because my mom. Was a staunch supporter of McCain in that election, and I was sort of like, well, I can't. My mom is not wrong here, so I need to prove that. I need to prove that she's right, that we're right. And so I wrote a column supporting McCain from my high school newspaper, 2008, and that kind of led me to go into more of like a more traditional news direction. I initially wanted to be a broadcast journalist, be it like a radio podcast host like yourself. Life took me in a different direction. And I think what has attracted me into journalism all these years, and specifically investigative journalism, is that I'm one of those people where whenever I get interested in a subject, I want to know everything about it. And if I don't know something, it drives me crazy. Like I just have to know everything. And I think, I really just like dig into things until like I really truly understand them. And so with regards to Wikipedia, I mean, this is a subject I've been investigating for several years now. And it's a very complicated subject because Wikipedia is really a world of its own. And it has a very, it has a labyrinth of arcane policies. They're all very vaguely written. So it's you have to basically the only way to understand them, at least from the perspective of a journalist, is that I've been lucky to be in contact with various Wikipedia editors. And I just keep asking questions about the policies and how things work on there, and I just keep asking and asking until it clicks, and what's good with Wikipedia is that you can see these various discussions play out, on the site in terms of what articles should and shouldn't say, and editors reference different policies and so forth. So between looking at all these discussions, I've looked at a lot of discussions on Wikipedia, many countless hours. Looking at Wikipedia discussions, asking my editor sources, I just keep doing that until it all clicks, until I finally understand it. But I think that's generally my approach to investigative journalism on really anything, not just Wikipedia, but just making sure that like when I sink my teeth to a subject, that I understand as much about it as possible. So that way, then I can accurately write about it and inform readers about it.
Well, that alone sometimes is a rarity in any field, and especially in journalism where people have that compulsion that you have. I think that leads me to my first question that I had for you, because a lot of people use Wikipedia, but they're not even sure what it is that they're using.
That's right.
Wikipedia can feel like the expert resource on everything in the world, basically, because you can look up a celebrity name, you can look up a product, you can look up a moment in history, and there will be a Wikipedia page on that. And it seems pretty credible. There's a lot of detail in there and footnotes and things like that. And it can feel like, well, this is the definitive source on this. But there is a little hint, because if you're a student writing a paper in college, or if you're somebody doing something that requires verification, oftentimes there's a stipulation. Your teacher will tell you, your professor will tell you, we will not accept Wikipedia as a source. So you already know there's a credibility issue there, because Wikipedia may not be as reliable or credible as a lot of people may think it is. So you have that as sort of a backdrop. But I think it's worth starting at the very beginning, and that is, how would you describe Wikipedia? What is it?
So Wikipedia, I mean, it basically is an open source encyclopedia. And so it sells itself on the idea that anyone can edit and become an editor. It's not quite that simple, though, because to even begin editing articles related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you have to have been an editor for at least 30 days and have made at least 500 edits, so it's just a high barrier to entry. The basic premise of Wikipedia, in terms of how it works, is through a process called consensus. If someone makes a change to a Wikipedia article and no one disputes the change, it's presumed to have consensus. But if someone does dispute the change, then editors are supposed to take it to what's called the talk page of Wikipedia article. Every Wikipedia article has a talk page. It's in the tab that says talk, right next to the article content. And editors are supposed to work out the differences on the talk page and reach a compromise. But this is the internet, and when it comes to contentious topics, people fight the internet, and there's often times a stalemate. And so what happens in those instances is that an official sort of poll is taken, which Wikipedians seek input on a particular dispute from the broader Wikipedia community, and they put in their stated positions and their rationales as to why an article should or shouldn't say something, and they have to cite Wikipedia policy as their rationale. And then at the end, an uninvolved Wikipedian in good standing, is also known as a closer, then comes in and renders a verdict on the discussion based on the numbers, as well as the strength of the arguments presented. And so a lot of times, like, when people are reading Wikipedia articles, what they're seeing is, I mean, it's the work of different editors, of course, but also like it's some of the text that's in there is the result of like these sort of formal discussions, and when those formal discussions have ended, it's hard to really change it after the fact, because consensus, numerically speaking, is at least 2/3. And so in order for certain changes to make a Wikipedia article, you need at least 2/3 of the Wikipedia community support to change it. And over time, like more and more discussions keep leaning in one direction, like they end up adding up, into presenting a more one-sided perspective on various contentious issues such as Israel-Palestine.
That's interesting. You reminded me of an old joke. What is a camel? It's a racehorse designed by a committee. And when you think about it, I mean, when you get a committee involved, when you get a group of people involved on any topic, you mentioned there's a consensus model, and sometimes it's like in a jury room too, where it's not so much that the jury always going to come to the right answer; they're going to come to the consensus answer, and the ones who are weak will cave to the ones who are strong in that jury. Or if you're on a committee, the ones who are weak or lazy or just not interested in the situation, and the ones who care more and the ones that are most involved and maybe the most dominant will get their way. So consensus isn't necessarily equal parts deciding the same things equally weighted. Usually a consensus model reflects the opinion of the most strong people
Yeah.
who have a voice in that decision. Now, I'm going to repeat what you kind of described just to make sure
Yeah.
that everybody's on the same page, because not everybody is an expert on Wikipedia, and that is that basically Wikipedia is an entity. It's not a for-profit. Is it a for-profit company or a non-profit company?
It's run by a nonprofit called the Wikimedia Foundation.
It's the
It
Wikimedia,
based, right, based in San Francisco.
right. And so you have all these volunteer editors, people who can sign up, go through a certain amount of training, I guess, and become editors. And they then can weigh in on just about any topic that shows up on Wikipedia. You know, if you're a sanctioned editor, you can make changes to entries, and that's how it happens. That's the price of entry there. It's volunteer editors. And who are these volunteer editors? Well, in the topic that we're talking about today, because you're talking about some of the ways politics in relation to Israel is reflected in Wikipedia, but you can go across the board. You can look at the Ukraine-Russia war and see the same dynamics. You can see American politics. You can see social issues. You can see celebrity issues on Wikipedia, and the same thing's going to happen. You're going to have volunteer editors working on things. You will have editors and content creators contributing to this. You'll have footnotes, so it's not just the editors themselves creating this, but the source material they're using for the entries. So if they got an article from Al Jazeera, you know, that's a source material, and they can say, well, that backs us up. That doesn't explain the fact that some sources are biased. So what we're talking about today really is how Wikipedia portrays Israel in some of these entries, and hopefully get an idea a little bit more about how Wikipedia operates, and I think for people who use Wikipedia, they can come away and say, well, they can be their own sort of judge as to how credible not only Wikipedia is in this context, but in other contexts as well. And I think it's still a good tool. I like Wikipedia as a starting point, the same way I like ChatGPT as a starting point.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't always get things. You just can't take it all on face value. So that said, sort of a big disclaimer there. You talked about who edits it. Now I'll start on April, this past April. 23 members of Congress. They expressed deep concern regarding anti-Semitism found in Wikipedia. That's what they said. Mm-hmm. That they felt that there was a certain amount of anti-Semitism. Could you describe what happened there? What was that, and what prompted it?
So they didn't specify exactly what prompted it. I mean, there's been a lot of reporting on Wikipedia in the past year, or really since October 7th. I think the bias on Wikipedia has really escalated after October 7th. And so there's been a lot of reporting on it, including from myself, which talked about how various entries were biased, such as like how the Zionism Wikipedia page describes Zionism as the colonization of Palestine. The Zionists wanted as many Jews and as few Palestinian Arabs as possible. A very one-sided, misleading stuff there. That's just one of many examples. And there have been reports of there was a massively viral article in Pirate Wires that talked about how that there are at least 40 pro-Hamas editors that seem to be working in coordination. There's also been reports of this Discord Discord server, I should say, called Tech for Palestine, which had a Discord channel dedicated to Wikipedia, where editors were collaborating on how to insert the anti-Israel narrative into various articles. And the coordinated aspects of this is really important because Wikipedia policy actually prohibits off-site coordinated editing like that. And for months, that Tech for Palestine campaign went on, and it took a while for the powers that be Wikipedia to take action. And I've talked to some who will still say that the action that they did take against those editors wasn't enough. So I would say that is likely what those 23 members of Congress were referring to. I just talk about a couple other things you had mentioned there. When talk about the consensus model and how consensus reflects the loudest and most persistent voices. It was actually an article called Criticism of Wikipedia that talks about that. And in that article, it talks about how it likens it to like a school board meeting where it's like the most loud and persistent voices end up winning in the end. And consensus reflects the politics of the politics of the people involved. And I think Wikipedia's editing base, generally speaking, is somewhere between like 2/3 to 3/4 of it are left leaning, based on various editors I've talked to. And on the Israel side, or I should like on the topic of Israel issues, in the past last year we saw some discussions that were as skewed as like 3-1 in favor of the anti-Israel side. Um, since then, there have been a bunch of anti-Israel editors sanctioned, so the numbers are a little bit more balanced. Um, but because the content is it's the status quo content, which, as I said earlier, that requires like 2/3 support to change. So a lot of the damage that was done in the past year, it's really hard to reverse. And talking about the sources that you mentioned, so it's important for people to understand that Wikipedia editors can only summarize what reliable sources say. Wikipedia editors also decide what sources are reliable. And so when you have a consensus model, of course, like the sources that they like and the sources that they don't like are going to reflect their politics. And so Al Jazeera, you mentioned that's a great example, because Al Jazeera is considered a generally reliable source on Wikipedia, even though it's funded by Qatar, and there have been instances where Al Jazeera has has promulgated misinformation and so forth. But editors always just dismiss those points. But you consider how Al Jazeera is considered reliable Wikipedia, but Fox News is not. Neither is like Daily Wire, New York Post. Right-leaning sites are considered inadmissible for the most part on Wikipedia. And hopefully the ADL was rendered generally unreliable.
Anti-Defamation League.
Yeah, Anti-Defamation League was rendered unreliable for the Israel-Palestine conflict on Wikipedia last year. But you can use like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, which are anti-Israel NGOs. The Poverty Law Center, a left-leaning nonprofit, is also considered reliable on Wikipedia. And so you can see the politics of Wikipedia editors in terms of these double standards of sources. And when you consider that Wikipedia editors can only summarize what reliable sources say, you can see how this alone, when it comes to sources that they like and don't like, can cause bias into a Wikipedia article.
I have a question for you about human nature, really, in relation to everything you just said. Because is this a function that there just aren't enough people who see things the other way or volunteering? In other words, is Wikipedia just getting more volunteers who lean one way or the other, and that's why it's reflecting that? How is that happening?
That's a great question. I think in a lot of ways Wikipedia is a reflection of our culture, and some of that, of course, is just by design when it comes to Wikipedia echoing legacy media outlets, as well as like biased academics. Academics in particular, Wikipedia is very deferential toward academia, and we know it's October 7th. How many faculty members are very biased against Israel because they take part in these anti-Israel demonstrations and encampments and so forth. But I think in terms of our culture, we're seeing, generally speaking, a more bifurcated culture where people are sticking to their respective ideological bubbles, and not talking to each other as much, and assuming bad faith and disagreements and so forth. And so, on Wikipedia, I think we're seeing this a bit too, even though Wikipedians are supposed to assume good faith. But at the end of the day, there are always these. There seems to be like these stalemates happening on Wikipedia that when they're decided by a closer or whatever, then it keeps going in one direction. And I think when we talk about the wokeism infecting institutions like academia and the media, I think it has this trickle down effect into Wikipedia as well. And because Wikipedia is the first thing to pop up on a Google search, people then you see Wikipedia content reflected back into media and academia, and so it's like this closed feedback loop of bias, between academia, the media, the NGOs like Amnesty and so forth, and Wikipedia. It's like a self-sustaining cycle of bias, and so yeah, that's where I think Wikipedia is reflective of our state of our society and culture to a certain degree.
Do you have any idea how many people visit Wikipedia in general in a given day? I'm not talking about any specific page, just the site itself. How many millions of people might check in on it on a given day?
It's got to be millions. I mean, I haven't checked like the exact numbers, but I think last time I think the last article I wrote on Wikipedia, it was something like it's the 6th most visited website worldwide. So and it's usually like in that category, like 6th, 5th, maybe 8th. You know, it can depend on a given month, but it's usually like high, like really high up there. And again, this is because Google puts Wikipedia at the top of its Google searches, and there's a whole article, there's a whole Wikipedia page dedicated to the long-standing relationship between Google and Wikipedia and how they collaborate. Google has donated money to the Wikimedia Foundation, which is nonprofit oversees Wikipedia. YouTube also uses Wikipedia to fight back against misinformation, you know, in various videos and so forth. So, I mean, really, Google is the only reason why Wikipedia is considered relevant. You know, so until like that relationship changes, you know, I mean, Wikipedia will continue to be like the world's go-to site for information, and which is why people should be paying attention to what goes on there.
And there are so many sites. I mean, I don't know which exactly what the rankings are, but I know the top ones. You could go to Reddit, you could go to Facebook, you could go to a lot of these social sites. The Google page itself, the Google search page.
Yeah.
So these are places where people go when they have questions. Now we're starting to see AI. So you have Grok on Twitter, you know, X platform. You have Gemini. You have Chat GPT. And so people are kind of going. In fact, I read an article this week in the Wall Street Journal where they said the future of search is in question because of AI now, because people are going to Chat GPT with questions that they might have gone to Google with. YouTube is another source because when people have a question, they go right to YouTube. So these are kind of the go-to places people go to in order to get answers to questions or go to other places. So they're not necessarily, you know, destinations in themselves. Wikipedia is one of them. And as you said, it's got this high volunteer thing. It's got this consensus model. You don't have arbiters of the truth per se that are saying, I will stake my career on the truth of this, whatever. They will basically argue, fight, cordially discuss with each other how they're going to arrive at what goes into an entry and what stays out of an entry and how things are prioritized within the entry. And that brings us now back to where you were already going. And that is this whole issue of, you know, the Wikipedia pages that are on certain topics. And you brought up October 7th. And I wanted to go back to that because you brought it up in an article I read too, one of your investigative articles. And I think people need to know that while there's a history of Israel going back to the 40s as a nation, and there's a history in the Middle East with Israelites and turmoil going back thousands of years, we can pick any one of those points and say, well, this is where this started and this is where that started. But in recent history, there was definitely an event, and it was October 7th, and it was a terrible event. And you say it here in your article, 1,139 innocent people were killed. How were they killed? Well, it was an unprovoked attack by a terrorist organization named Hamas. And so it wasn't, they weren't, the group behind it was Hamas. It's a terrorist organization. The United States State Department has recognized it as such. It wasn't a war between necessarily this geopolitical Palestine. It was Hamas. But Hamas is the controlling party in Gaza. So you have that. And in response to that, as everyone could have predicted, is, well, if you attack Israel or any country, if you attack America and you kill 1,139 people, there will be a response. And we saw that back in 9/11 in 2001 when America was attacked and about 3,000 people were killed. America responded by, going into Afghanistan and then later Iraq. You can argue over whether they were good strategic moves or not. But the fact is there was retaliation as a response to something like that. how significant was October 7th for not just the nation of Israel, but I would say people who have Israeli origins around the world?
Well, it was very significant, and it was truly a devastating, gut-wrenching day for. I mean, for many of us in the Jewish community, like even if we didn't have, like, if we didn't know anyone in Israel who was affected, like it was still, I mean, it felt like an attack on all of us, you know, because Hamas is a Jew-hating, genocidal terrorist organization. They say in their charter that their aim is to kill Jews and destroy Israel, and so and we saw that on October 7th. Um, but on Wikipedia, there have been efforts to try and paint Israel as the aggressor and try and whitewash Palestinian terrorism. One of the ways in which they did that was that after October 7th, they put they put on the Hamas Wikipedia page that one of its ideologies is anti-imperialism, which is a way to make it look like a resistance group. I mean, that was later taken out like months after I had reported on it in my first article on the subject in the Jewish Journal. But that shows like it. But they also took out anti-Semitism as one of the ideologies for Hamas in the Hamas Wikipedia page. And last I checked, that's still missing. So it shows you how Wikipedia editors have operated since October 7th. And so and I think October 7th it wasn't just the horrific massacre. It was the fact that like many people supported and celebrated the massacre. And we saw these various pro-Hamas protests erupt around the nation, and worldwide for that matter. You know, chanting from the river to the sea. Globalize the Intifada. And it resulted in this surge in anti-Semitism worldwide, especially on college campuses. I mean, and that's why Columbia, Harvard, so many of these institutions have been in the news the past couple of years, and the Trump administration has been taking action to leverage federal funding to try and get these universities to better crack down on anti-Semitism.
When you look at anti-Semitism, and there are certain things people say now that in my lifetime, you'd never think of saying. You never think of thinking, actually, in America. And yet in America, we have actual group protests, people chanting things that we never thought we'd hear on our shores. And so there has been a rise in anti-Semitism. And I think what really shocks people is how it almost seems, I don't want to say it's normalized at this point, but it's tolerated. It's tolerated by people who you would never think that should tolerate it, people in Congress. And so what there has to have been a signal that somebody got that said it's okay to say this now. It's okay to do this now. Can you think of a pivotal point in the last 5 or 10 years when something happened that said it's actually okay to be more, if you're not an outright anti-Semite, you can say things that at least could be confused with that?
I think it's been a process over time, because I think when we talk about like wokeism and the theory of intersectionality, which is the idea that like the quote unquote oppressed voices, have more of a say. I think we saw a lot of anti-Israel rhetoric that was anti-Semitic become normalized on the campuses and other institutions, using anti-Israel rhetoric to spread libels against Israel and the Jewish people. But it was like hand waved away as like, oh, it's just against Israel. It's not anti-Semitic. But I think like over time, like as more and more professors and NGOs and so forth accuse Israel of apartheid, and you see that echoed by members of Congress and so forth. It just became it became more and more normalized in society. Like a slow burn of sorts. And then when October 7th happened, it just like all came to the surface at once, and now the libel we're seeing today is the accusation Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, and we're seeing that libel being amplified more and more on the campuses and elsewhere, and on Wikipedia too. Like there's actually a Wikipedia article called Gaza Genocide, And so when people normalize these allegations that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians, that Israel is an apartheid state, etc., etc., it results in more anti-Semitism against Jews, generally speaking, because Israel is the world's only Jewish state and has a disproportionate amount of attention given to it because it's the world's Jewish state, and it's demonized. And so then what anti-Semites do is that they hold Jews responsible for the state of Israel. And so if you're a Zionist, which most Jews are, I mean, polls have consistently shown that over 90% of Jews in America consider themselves Zionists, meaning that they support Israel's right to exist. They support the right for Jews to have self-determination. And so, but then you see people like you see more and more people describe Zionism as an inherently genocidal ideology, and so you see Zionists or pro-Israel students being excluded from various spaces on campus, and we're starting to see more and more of that, even beyond campus. And so, so to answer your question, it was a slow burn over time of normalizing anti-Semitism under the guise of anti-Zionism, and it all came to the surface after October 7th.
So October 7th was that event. Now
it was that event, yeah.
Yeah, and how would you describe Zionism? Because that's a term you used, and I know you said that Wikipedia doesn't quite get it right. But in your definition, what is Zionism? Is it, and I'll ask the open-ended question, is it religious? Is it not religious? Is it nationalist? Or is it a philosophy?
Basically, Zionism is the right for the Jewish people of self-determination. So it's the idea that the Jews can have the right to have their own nation. I mean, so that there are various Islamic and Christian countries out there. Like, of course, Jews should have that same right too. So the problem with Wikipedia's definition is that they describe it as the colonization of Palestine. And to justify the term colonization, they try to say that, like, oh, these various Zionist founders described it that way. But that term was being used anachronistically in like the early Zionist writings, because what they were referring to as colonization at the time was really like resettlement. Like, it was resettling, like the ancestral Jewish homeland. But that gets perverted by anti-Israel activists to say that, like, oh, like, they support settler colonialism. That's another anti-Israel invective that's used a lot. And also, like, the Wikipedia page just says the Zionists want as many Jews and as few Arabs as possible. That's also not true. I mean, maybe there are some Zionists that did want that, but I think that overall, no. I mean, there have been records showing that the early Zionist leaders, that they reached out to the Arabs in the land for peace, to try to. And the Arabs that did stay in Israel after the 48 War became today's Israeli Arabs. So yeah, I mean, yeah.
What you found in your report that I read it a couple of times just because it was so packed with information, and I thought what you basically found in your report was the trend was. And you verified it because you really did some digging. That is, you had Wikipedia pages on these topics like October 7th and other topics that you already mentioned. And you basically have these editors, these volunteer editors and contributors who happen to be professors at American universities and other universities, and they're all contributing to this, but it's not just your opinion that they have pro-Hamas or pro-leanings. They've given other speeches in real life on these topics. They've written articles in real life on these topics, and they have a clear point of view, a clear worldview on Israel and its right to exist or other things. And so you have to know that they bring that to bear when they edit the Wikipedia page. Then, as you've done your analysis, you found that indeed the Wikipedia pages that they were involved with, reflected more their opinions than necessarily both sides of the issue or one side of the issue that may have been totally buried in the process.
Well, what I would say is that, actually, probably clarify that like I don't actually identify any of the editors really in my articles. I identify some of the academic sources that they use and why, and why they were using anti-Israel academics' opinions and trying to claim that it was the mainstream view, and so therefore it should be put in a neutral voice on Wikipedia, which is really, it's goes with the whole idea of neutrality, really. But I would say, like, when it comes to who these editors are, well, I mean, most of them are anonymous, and Wikipedia actually encourages editors to be anonymous. And so, I mean, they can really be anybody, and there are plenty of editors who are notorious through their username. We don't know who they really are. I would say that just from what I've heard, that a lot of the editors on Wikipedia in regards to Israel Palestine, like they do tend to be academics, particularly European. And I think, broadly speaking, on Wikipedia, Americans are a relative minority in terms of the editor base, and that the majority is like they are European. And I think a lot of it is like these, old weird Marxist internet dudes, as well as a combination of like the younger Gen Z types, who so I think I think I think that generally speaking gives you an idea of Wikipedia's editor base. But again, it's like, but I think that there are certainly some editors, including Israel Palestine, who are academics, academics at different universities worldwide. Uh, but we don't know who a lot of these people are. And when you consider just how much influence Wikipedia has, on our society, on our culture, and that like basically like these anonymous editors are essentially dictating, what the world's go to for information says. I can see how some of view that as a problem, and so that I think it's worth. I think the Wikipedia community should have a conversation about that.
That's an interesting conversation to have. And I'll clarify what I said, because and I think you made it clear, but I want to make sure I reiterate it, that I was a little bit wrong there, because when I read your article, you talked about some of these academics and I was confusing them with editors, but they weren't editors, they were sources, but they were dominant sources because the editors seemed to like their word over others. So that was it.
That's right.
But the editors themselves, like you said, tend to be anonymous. And I want to go back, because you mentioned academics, and I want to go back to sort of a broader question now. Mm-hmm. And that is, when we look at college campuses in America and this issue of anti-Semitism, one of the issues that I have seen, and this is the topic that we really follow on this podcast, is the issue of the First Amendment and free speech. And so you have on college campus, you have these protesters, and they're a lot of things pass for a protest these days that isn't just walking peacefully with a protest sign. People do things that they say in the name of protesting that could be confused with violence and rioting. And what I mean by that on college campuses is you have protesters who have a point of view on these issues on Israel, and they'll take over a building, they'll take over a library, they'll take over an academic building. Okay, that's part of it. But then they seem to be setting themselves outside of classrooms or groups where they know there are Jewish students. So they're protesting, they're using their right to free speech, but they're doing it not against the government, they're not doing it against the school necessarily. They're doing it against their fellow students, or maybe they're not even students themselves, but they're doing it against students at that university. That has very much an intimidating effect on those people. That's not just
absolutely
in my mind. That's where you kind of blur the lines between free speech and are you intimidating and harassing other students? Are you preventing them from going to class? Are you, and in some of these cases, are you threatening these students with physical violence? And in other cases, and you've documented it, and it's well documented, this kind of erupts into actual violence that targets Jewish people. So it goes from free speech and it escalates. How would you describe it? I mean, when people say, wait a second, these people have a right to free speech on college campuses, they're allowed to express their opinion of Israel. I would say if that were it, I'd agree with that, right? Wouldn't you agree with that they have a right to have a problem with Israel? But where's the line?
That's a great question. I think the line goes, as you said, is that like they're targeting Jewish students, and we're seeing, like, we've seen plenty of anti-Israel protests target Hillels on various campuses, because they say, oh, Hillel is Zionist entity, we need to protest it. And so and and, and so I think that in a nutshell kind of shows the issue with these protests, right? Is that it's not just they're not protesting against, not just protesting against Israel. It's like they're actively targeting Jewish students on campuses, and there'd be so many reports, so many lawsuits against these various universities that talk about how, during these protests, Jewish students felt intimidated, and these protesters went and harassed them, and in some cases, like, there was instances of violence, and the university didn't really do anything about it. And I mean, there's just countless examples of those kinds of things happening, and so. And so I think that's the line is drawn, is that these protesters are targeting Jewish students. They are that they sealed off parts of campuses. We saw that at UCLA last year, where Jewish students were caught on video being blocked from entering, like, parts of the main campus and so forth. We've also seen instances of anti-Israel protesters disrupting classes, or making it hard to concentrate during class because they can hear the protests outside, and so forth. So I mean, I think the line is that is when it disrupts the learning environment on campus. Whether it's harassment or disrupting actual class, and so forth. And that, of course, goes against the whole purpose of university, right? It's for students to learn. And so if protesters are disrupting that, then that's a problem. And I think a lot of what we're seeing the Trump administration doing now with leveraging federal funding and so forth is aimed at trying to get universities to better address that.
That's been the defense too of some of the schools that the Trump administration has gone after. Is this is a First Amendment issue? They try to take it to the free speech issue, but there's another concept called othering. If you other,
yeah,
and that would, just to explain what that is we're talking about the potential for a Jewish student to be targeted. Well, the othering concept would be, well, let's take any other identity and put that in the Jewish person's place. Would you tolerate that? So, and I'll be broad about it. So, like, if we say, if that were female students, if there were protesters saying we're going to block this classroom because there's a bunch of females in it and we're anti-female. How would that be treated by the media? How would that be treated by the school itself? Would that be a free speech issue or something else? Have you been criticized for making those kinds of points in your own writings and maybe in your own public appearances?
I mean, I personally haven't, but I'm sure there are others that have. I mean, it's so. And a hypothetical that you mentioned, I think there's no question the university would take strong action against those protesters, and the media would be all up in arms about it. And we see 24/7 coverage, and look, they would all be justified. The media will be justified in its coverage of that, as would the university in terms of the action take against it. But they don't treat it that way when it comes to Jewish students who are affected by these types of protests. And that's really where the double standard lies.
That's interesting. I'm a Irish American, Irish Catholic, and I worked on the Pittsburgh St. Patrick's Day parade for 10 years, and we the group that I was involved with, we like to have a good time and like to have the parade, but we also made a special effort to combat stereotypes. It's not quite rising to the level of anti-defamation like stuff, but we didn't like T-shirts that perpetuated stereotypes, and we didn't like certain things, and we banned entries from the parade that celebrated one aspect of Irish culture that we didn't think was a good identity for it. So you have that, and so when you talk about, I guess, how groups are portrayed and how groups are. I guess my whole point of bringing that up is it seems like it's acceptable to cross the line when it involves certain things or certain people or certain groups. In my case, you can go to a Walmart and find a T-shirt that talks about the Irish and drinking. So even though some Irish people may be offended by it, a lot of Irish people are not offended by it, but it's a stereotype that's tolerated to the point where you can buy a T-shirt in Walmart about that. So that's that. But when you think about it, it's not necessarily fair. And you can go down the line. There are different groups and different situations and different scenarios where certain things are tolerated and other times certain things are not. Where do you think, and in my life, anti-Semitism was pretty high up there as a social offense. You wouldn't want to do it, and you certainly wouldn't want to be accused of it. And yet at the same time, it seems that it's not as big a deal now. How have you seen this play out beyond the pages of Wikipedia in your life?
So I think a lot of this goes back to sort of the woke leftist ideology and the whole idea of oppressor-oppressed narratives. Because under woke ideology, like you have like the oppressors are like the white colonialists, and the oppressed are various minority groups. And so under this ideology, Israel is considered the oppressor, and by extension, Jews, and Jews are considered white. Under this ideology, the Palestinians are considered the oppressed, and their struggle, and the Palestinian struggle, so to speak, is linked with like civil rights in America and so forth. It's really perverse too. It's a perverse framework to try and and put the Israel-Palestine conflict through that lens. But that's how this has played out on college campuses. And permeated in more and more into society, and I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing, as why we've seen Jewish students targeted on campuses, and why these universities have not taken enough action. Is that it goes back to this sort of this oppressed narrative that we're seeing in DEI offices, and so forth. And so, like in my personal life, I've been lucky to have not experienced much of that really. But I mean, I report on these subjects, on these stories a lot in my career. And I mean, and you see these types of narratives and stories play out like on the campuses in particular. But you see it sometimes in, outside of that as well, like in, in other like DEI boardrooms and so forth. I
have a two-part question to finish up, and I'll ask the second part later.
Yeah.
But the first part of that is a historical question, to the extent that you can answer that, and that is, anti-Semitism is something that existed. It existed long before the Israel state in the 1940s. But can you sort of pinpoint how anti-Semitism was able to be framed as a bad thing and discouraged in society? So for decades, it was really a bad thing to be accused of being an anti-Semite, and there's had to be a reason for that. It didn't happen by accident that it became a bad thing. So can you pinpoint an event or a group or a thing or a campaign that was able to finally convince society that anti-Semitism is really a bad thing?
I think the Holocaust, the aftermath of the Holocaust, when people learned of the Nazis' atrocities, that's when people realized just how dangerous anti-Semitism is, and I think ever since then, ever since then, it's very easy for people to condemn and denounce Nazis and neo-Nazis. What we typically associate with like right-wing anti-Semitism, like everyone universally condemns that, as they should, because these people are the scum of the earth and they're on the fringes of society, and they should be relegated to like to the fringes. The problem has been with anti-Semitism on the left, in terms which has manifested itself as anti-Zionism, and these blood libels that are used against the state of Israel, because it's been couched as like, oh, it's just criticism of Israel. It's not anti-Semitic, anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. But but as I stated on the show, it's like the more this has fomented, the more it's built up. Like the more anti-Semitism has worsened, because these blood libels against the Jewish state, they have resulted in anti-Semitism against the Jewish people as well. And so because that anti-Semitism has become more and more normalized, that's why we've seen the rise of anti-Semitism worldwide since October 7th.
Well, that's perfect. And I'm not surprised at all that you mentioned that. I mean, if you want to change people's opinion, words don't always do it. It's usually going to be one of a couple of things, and one of those things would be a historical event that doesn't involve you, but usually it's going to be something that happens in your own life that does involve you, that does affect you or your family. So you mentioned the Holocaust. Well, the Holocaust, there are so many people who can say, my grandmother, my mother, we emigrated, we came to America because, and then you have people in America whose neighbors, told them firsthand stories about the Holocaust and about all of that. And it became this shared experience in America since the 1940s. And as you said, the reports were wide and thorough about what happened there. And his entire books and everything has built up around that story. Now, going forward, you don't have these people in these, Nazi uniforms walking around, identifying themselves the way they did in Germany in the 1940s. How do you see, I guess, the righteous cause of beating back anti-Semitism? How do you see that taking shape going forward and being effective?
I think that, it's hard to predict the future, but the trends certainly aren't good. When we see how badly anti-Semitism has risen since October 7th, and been rising for years even before that, I think, I think the narrative needs to be reframed, and make it clear that we're talking about Jew hatred, and explain like how Jewish students, how Jewish community at large has been negatively impacted by these anti-Israel blood libels that they're put out there by academia, by these protesters, and so forth, and explain how it's resulted in many Jews being targeted, and how to get a message out there. I mean, it's gonna be tough when fighting against the institutional bias at the campuses, at Wikipedia. And even to the media, to a degree, given the media is biased against Israel. But I think social media, I mean, there's certainly a lot of faults with social media, and anti-Semitism has been a problem there too. But the good thing about social media is that it allows for people's voices to speak out freely for the most part. So I would say that people should be sharing their experiences on social media, and try to reframe the narrative. And there's certainly a lot of other news outlets out there that are accurately reporting on these issues, such as Jewish News Syndicate, where I currently work, and Real Clear Politics. Real Clear Investigations has done a lot of good work on this too. So I think those are the avenues to explore, and I think it's going to be a long uphill battle to try and fight back against these institutional forces that have helped normalize anti-Zionism.
Aaron Bandler, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on. Appreciate it.
The Shaping Opinion podcast is a production of O'Brien Communications. Copyright O'Brien Communications 2025. Find us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you like to watch, go to YouTube, Rumble, or our Substack page, shapingopinion.com.